Oh man, there he is. Dan Harris. So excited to have you. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I so appreciate you.
Great to see you. I have studio envy. Your studio looks super profesh.
Yeah, I think if you work harder at your career, um, you can get to a Home Depot shed. You're not there yet. Someday, Dan, I believe in you. I wanted to wait till I press record to tell you how grateful I am to you and your team at your podcast, because the last 3 years, almost four of my life have been like some of the hardest, losing my job, challenges with my marriage, the pandemic. But your podcast and your work and your guests and your practice have created one for me, a practice that has saved me over and over. And I mean it from straight from my heart to you. I know these kinds of compliments are sometimes challenging, but I hope that you'll take it in the nature of it. I am so grateful to you for your work. Nobody has done more in media than you to improve my life. Thank you to your whole team.
I really appreciate that immensely. Thank you. Right back at you. How are you doing now? You mentioned getting fired and also having some marriage problems. How are you?
It's like all those things are still a lot of work to keep going. I'm a self-employed, my marriage is still, we still struggle, and it's tough to keep it going, but I'm doing like better than I've ever done, and it's because of the practice that I've created, and that is in many ways because of the conversations you've had and the teachers and experts you've had on your show, in many ways.
Hmm. I'm really glad to hear that. Well, I'm not glad to hear that you're struggling, but I am glad to hear that
My mic just
that you've
broke.
got to
That's how much
practice.
I'm struggling. um so I think I just wanted to start by talking to you, say, how much do you hear this from men? I wanted to talk about your own
Hmm.
journey and how, your career changed so much and how much you've changed. And I feel like men still have a hard time finding these kinds of emotional solutions, whether they be traditional through therapy or other practices. Do you feel like there's a real gender difference in what you hear from folks in your own experience?
I think you're on something. I think there is a difference. Most from what I can tell from looking at the demographic data, and I don't look at it super closely or super often, but from what I can tell, the majority of the listeners to my podcast and the majority of the subscribers to the app that I co-founded, the meditation app, are female.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time, there's been a lot of good work done looking at the problems of men and boys in this society, and I think I think they're multifactorial. One thing that's coming to mind right away is that men are often not so good at making friends and keeping friends and upkeeping and the upkeep that's involved in having those relationships, and that can be a massive source of like happiness degradation. And so I try to be actually quite diligent about that, old friends, keeping up those relationships, because if the only person you're relying on is your spouse, that's that's a recipe for no one person can be all things to you. So I think having social support of many flavors is important.
What else have you learned about that specific issue of community and having people in your life? I feel like a lot of experts you've had on have talked about that, but I also feel like it's a pretty important part of Buddhism: community, friends, people in your life to keep you from going down any number of spirals.
Well, a couple of things to say about that. I'm putting the ideas in order in my head. The first thing is on Buddhism. Yeah, right. And I'm very influenced by Buddhism. Consider myself to be a Buddhist, and the Buddha himself, 2,600 years ago, talked about the three jewels, the three. It's a kind of a grandiose way to put it, but it's really basically the three pillars, the three central parts of the practice. And Buddhism is practiced as a religion, but I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in anything that can't be proven, and so you can practice Buddhism as really just a set of practices, or as as a friend of mine has said, Buddhism is not something to believe in, it's something to do. It's a set of practices like meditation practices, ethical practices that have increasingly been proven out by modern science to be really good for you. So back to the Buddha, he talked about these three jewels, or the three most important parts of the practice. One is the Buddha himself, and that wasn't meant to be like egoic. It was more like the Buddha as an avatar of enlightenment, of an example, as an example of somebody, of what the practice can do for you. The second is the Dharma, which is the teachings of the Buddha, which are fascinating. Just an incredible intellectual infrastructure that you can put around your meditation practice. And the third is the Sangha, which is the community. And so there's like I often joke, like an HOV lane or a carpool lane effect to doing this with other people. And I think that's just incredibly important. And it's increasingly being borne out by modern science. I have been very influenced by a guy named Robert Waldinger, who is the so you're nodding your head, you know who he is, but just for the uninitiated, he's the latest chief of a long-running study. I believe it may be the longest-running study ever.
Yeah.
It's on several generations of people in Boston and in the Boston area, and they're looking at what makes people live long, happy lives. And the clear takeaway is that you will live longer and happier life if you have quality relationships.
Yeah.
And why? What's the mechanism for that? Stress is what kills us mostly, and we can handle stress better when we have social support. There's a great expression. You should tattoo this. Literally, I mean, I'm increasingly a proponent of putting tattoos on you to remind you of important things. Never worry alone. And I think I think a lot of guys are worrying alone, or worrying with the wrong people, with people who are trying to radicalize them in I think unconstructive directions. The final thing, and I know I'm going on long here, but the final thing I'll say, and this is really, I think about this in the context of men. So many men are really into optimization. We optimize for our sleep. We wear a special ring for that. We get on a Peloton bike, or we run, we do Ironman, we do Tough Mudder, whatever it is. We're optimizing for all this shit. But the one thing that is the most important lever in terms of your health and happiness and longevity is the quality of your relationships. And I don't see anybody talking about optimizing that.
Well, listen, I like to go hard. I like to live on the edge. I like to, really tackle life and not sleep and get out. And there's so much of that kind of manly attitude, which is instructed by so many different causes and effects in our culture, which you've talked a lot about. You mentioned Robert Waldinger. He's the guy who I was thinking about when I asked about community. That episode, your interview with him, is so good. Your interviews are always, my wife says you're the best interviewer she knows, which is
that's
troublesome for me because I interview people for a living. But I've learned so much from you in terms of listening and communicating. You've had these great communications experts, the couple, Medita. Yeah. I learned so much from them. Say a little bit more about men though and communication, because I feel like we really have a hard time telling each other that we might have any issues at all.
Yeah, so we are not socialized for vulnerability, for openness about the stuff that's going on with us. And everybody's got stuff. So you can pretend, you can be Mr. Macho and pretend you got no problems, but that's bullshit. And it's not going to help you at all to do that pretending, and nor is it going to help anybody who looks to you as a role model, like your children, for example. And I think a key part, and this comes up and over in the interviews I've done on my show, and it comes up over and over in my research into these things, a key part of having healthy relationships is being open and honest about what's going on for yourself. And that means admitting frailty and weakness and having struggles. And this is a practice. It's a hard thing to do. It's not your fault if you're struggling with it. If you're a dude and you don't know how to begin with this, and you're worried that, you don't want to overshare, this is a whole set of skills that are there for you to work on. But it's about figuring out who can you trust, and can you make some experiments and try revealing some things to start with one person and see how it goes. But it just comes back to never worrying alone. If you just keep that in mind, the way you keep in mind that you need to achieve ketosis or whatever the hell you're working on in your with your body, then I think that's probably going to do a lot better things for you.
I feel like you almost more than anybody has introduced meditation to a certain kind of guy because you are that kind of guy. Like I'm the avatar for you. Like you're a few years ahead of me in different ways and different things. We've had similar careers. We grew up in similar ways. And I know I'm not alone when I listen to you and I read you and I hear you talk about your life. There's so many of us in America or elsewhere that grew up together like you, but it's weird for me because when I listen to you talk about your struggles, I'm like, why would he? What does he have to struggle about? His podcast is the best in the world, one of the top podcasts. He's now on the Mount Rushmore of meditation gurus with other people that he grew up loving. Have you seen his wife? She's also a doctor. She's got a great kid. He's got a house. He's got a TED Talk seen by like 1 million people. What could possibly go wrong? And I do this, by the way, with everybody. With Dan Harris. I mean, he's got no worries at all, no concerns at all. And I think that we do that to each other, but I certainly do that to you. And I wonder what you say to people like me who think, well, he's got it all. He's got no problem.
You want to work through the things I'm worried about?
I know what you're worried about because you talk about it, but it's like, you talk about the struggle with your book. You talk about, just the demons in your head. But I'm like, how can he have this stuff anymore? His practice is perfect. I know it's ridiculous what I'm saying. I know you'll have plenty of great things to say.
Oh, it's completely natural, and this what you're doing, and I do it too. I mean, this in Buddhism we often talk about comparing mind, which is just such an unhappy place to
Oh, it's
be.
terrible. It's terrible.
It's terrible, and it's put on steroids by social media. I'm not a Luddite. I'm on social media, whatever, but it is the rapid route to unhappiness to sit there and look at edited versions, curated version of somebody else's life and compare it to your own shitty life. That is guaranteed to make you unhappy double quick. So it's completely natural what you're doing, and I do it with other people, of course. But there are, well, first of all, I try to be very aware of how lucky I am. They really, I mean, I often joke about it with guests on the show. Like all the privileges, I got them all, except for the fact that I'm short. But every other white male, straight,
I did too.
cis,
That speaks to me. I did too, and yet I haven't done as well as Dan. I know it's crazy, and I know people do that to me constantly.
Yeah, I compare myself to other people in this space. Like I'm pretty good friends with, or have a budding friendship with Adam Grant, who has, I think every book he's done has gone to #1. Yeah. He's got massive social media following. He's just so successful. Or Sam Harris, who's a mentor of mine and a friend, and he's just a huge figure in the culture. And I can definitely see that stuff coming up. But this is where meditation is very helpful, because if you're mindful, in other words, if you have a kind of self-awareness that has some friendliness to it, you can see, oh yeah, I'm being fucking crazy right now. This is totally useless. And just also to know that no matter how many advantages, no matter how lucky you've been, there are an infinite number of ways to suffer. And no matter, I don't care how rich you are, how good looking you are still subject to aging, illness, and death. And so is everybody you know. You are still subject to the comparing mind. You're still subject to the fact that we have hardwired into us a kind of insatiability. No amount of lattes, no amount of promotions, no amount of new purchases will ever do it for you. This is just the truth of the human condition. So compare away if you want, but if you think about it with any degree of logic, you'll know that everybody's life is hard no matter what the external circumstances.
Well, I'm just here to tell you that I know Adam Grant well. I know Sam Harris well. I know their work well. Neither of them can do an interview like you can.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Like it's all ego is what you're saying. It's so much wrapped up in ego. And I think that's, again, I really think sticking on this idea, because I think a lot about this. of gender and men. You're writing a book about love, loving compassion. And you've been influenced by people like Sharon Salzberg and so many others. And I mean, even the language you talk about in your TED Talk, and I think that's your appeal to a lot of men as well, is that the way that you talk about the words that you use, how you make fun of a certain type of language, it appeals to me. It appeals to us. But now you're writing a book about love. Explain what you're trying to do and why this is so important that you would, make it the subject of your book.
Well, I was surprised when it became clear that I because sometimes I'll start writing a book and I don't really know what the book's about until a couple of years in, and I started hearing myself say when people would ask me, what's your book about? I started hearing myself say, well, I think it's about love. And my wife was like, what? And I remember I was on the set of I used to, as you know, I used to be the co-anchor of the weekend edition of Good Morning America. And I was on the set with my co-hosts one morning. And one of my, how I relate to people interpersonally is I make fun of them a lot, especially if I like you, I'm going to tease you. And so I used to make fun of my co-hosts a lot because I love them. We're still very close, even though I don't work there anymore. And somebody asked me within the context of us all sitting around the desk, what's your book about? And I said love, and two people did spit takes. They just spit their coffee out because they were like, what, you? And but I think of love. And well, first of all, it's kind of, sorry, I just drank some smoothie and I've got smoothie in my throat here. I think of love in, yeah, it's kind of deliberately provocative, picking the word love. I'm choosing it because it's so culturally loaded
Yeah.
as a term that I'm kind of running right into the fire on this one of I know people are going to have a reaction to the idea of a book about love, especially guys, but I think of love in a much more sort of holistic way where it's not just romantic love.
Right.
Tom Cruise saying "You complete me" with string music behind him, like that's one very narrow band of this evolutionarily wired capacity that we all have to give a shit. And you've heard my rap on this before. We became the apex predator on planet Earth, not because we were the strongest, but because we have the capacity to cooperate, communicate, and collaborate. And that is inarguable. And if you ignore that, no amount of optimizing you do is ever going to get you as happy or as healthy as you think you want to be. We need each other. No, and I think a big part of the optimization, especially the physical fitness stuff, and I'm into fitness too, that men are doing, is really about kind of denying our interconnection. It's like the world's chaotic, so I'm gonna just make sure I'm in ketosis as much of the time, and my abs are as visible as possible.
Right.
And actually, all of that is if you care truly about doing life better, if you care about being as healthy as possible, that is only part of the solution. Yes, you need to work on your body. And again, I do it, but you really need to work on your relationships. And that is what I consider love. It can be anything north of neutral. It can be anything from, and there's a lot of science around micro interactions, how you interact with like the barista, for example, all the way up to how you relate to your friends, how you relate to your parents, how you relate to your significant others, your children. All of that is love. And by the way, so is self-love, because the way the quality of your inner weather is going to directly impact how you treat other people, and how you have those relationships with other people is going to impact your inner weather, because you are not an isolated ego navigating the world and extracting as much value as you can. You are embedded. This is not up for discussion, even though it may feel that way on some level in your head. So I'm really kind of working my way toward making an argument about love that will appeal in I hope in a unisex way for all genders, but in particular, I try to aim for the hardest group to reach, and that is men.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I mean, I think your podcast and your work is genderless, obviously. Buddhism, meditation is. But I think the problem, certainly in our culture, lies a lot with, and I'm more focused on it over the past few years because I've been experiencing it with men. In your TED Talk, you talk about love just simply equaling the human capacity to care. And I now have a litmus test with the men in my life, and this has been going on for several years. If I get to know somebody, I work with them, I like them, even listeners of my show that I've gotten to know really well, I've taken to saying, and they to me, I love you. And when a
Yes.
man
Yes.
says, I love you to me,
Yeah.
it's kind of his, I feel like signaling. He's signaling where he's at, but that's a new thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really uncomfortable for a lot of men, because if you tell me you love me and you're a man, that could mean you're coming on to me. It's sexual. And I'm as straight as they come, as you know, Dan, except for 1998 steam room Equinox, but I was working there and I needed the money. But the point is, men are so afraid of that kind of affection, for it might enter into a sexual realm. And yet there's so many guys now of all sexual orientations and confused about whatever, that are like, I love you. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's a signal, and I feel like that's new-ish, and it kind of shouldn't be. Do you want to pick up on any part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I say it to my friends, and it is, even though I'm like the guy writing a book about love, like I'm the jacked up love guru over here, it still can be a little uncomfortable for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm not like, maniacal about it, but I do say it. And I think, being friends with a lot of gay men has actually civilized me in this way.
For sure.
That it just kind of helped me relax on my, pathological efforts to assert my manliness. Like, so, all right, give it
Yeah.
a rest. Okay, you're straight. Everybody knows it's not in question. Shut the fuck up and just, stop trying to prove yourself all the time. And but I think the good news is that younger men, I don't think, have this hang up. I think we grew up in a time when, like, calling somebody gay was the ultimate insult, and now it's just like neither here nor there. I think in many pockets of this country. Now, I'm not saying that homophobia has died off, because it hasn't, but in many big, heavily populated areas in this country, is totally fine to be gay, bi, trans, whatever. And so that I think is a positive development for humanity.
Yeah, there's no doubt that when you spend time with people across the spectrum, it changes the way you view yourself, and it even changes the way, like, it was not too long ago with a guy who was hitting on me, flirting with me nonstop, and I loved it. It was totally, like, it was fine. It was flattered. Women aren't necessarily doing that. I'll take whatever I can get. So it's like, it was just, I'm so comfortable. He knows me, and it's fine. Like, you're very comfortable in it, and I think that that's a maturity that you have, but mainly because you're immersed in a wide range of people, as you have been with your career and where you live. But it's not true across the country or the world, I guess,
Right.
is what you were saying. I feel like we're in a tough spot with men and our culture still, though, and I feel like your work has meant a lot to so many. And I guess I just wanted to ask. My wife said she's such a big fan of yours. She's constantly. I mean, I hear your voice in the kitchen. It's quite irritating. I'm like, do you not have headphones? Like, I'm going to listen to that episode, and I don't need to hear. I'm trying to sleep. But she said, ask him, as a result, for other people listening, how far have you come since you basically, I guess, wrote your book, started your podcast? How much growth have you seen in yourself, as a way to explain to other people how much growth you can create, how much change you can actually have after, say, I don't know, 40, when we're set in our ways and the script is written?
You can make a lot of progress. I feel like I have made a lot of progress, and as I often say, I retain the capacity to be a schmuck. I mean, I screw things up all the time, all the time.
That's a
And
little, I know it's true, but because I'm a fan and I hear you a lot, it's a little hard to believe. I know it's stupid for me to say that, and I know you're being honest, but, like, what do you do? What have you done?
Well, that's the perfect question. I think if my wife were here, she would say, even though we have worked on it a lot and gone to couples counseling, off and on for years, it's been super helpful for us, which, by the way, I highly recommend. And I also recommend to go as a preventive measure, because we
Yeah.
were not like we were not having, we really haven't, almost never had, like, existential bouts of, like, existential questions about whether we should stay together. That's not really been an issue. It's more like we've got awkwardnesses or strains in the relationship, and we want to work on them. I think she would say, even after all of that, I can be a little distant and cold at times,
Hmm.
not that affectionate. Um, yeah, that's a thing we work on. That if I feel like somebody's making a demand of me, I will refuse to give it to them sometimes. So if I feel, and often I get these feelings about my wife when they're not even true, because I can tell myself a story. Oh, she's being needy right now, when she's actually not, and I'm projecting my past resentments of maybe her behavior from 15 years ago, um,
Yeah.
and so I'm being unfair. But somehow I get in my head that she's expecting me to be a certain way right now, and I can get stubborn about not wanting to give it to her because I feel like she's asking. And then it's really what's happening is I feel like she's asking, and then it raises a bunch of questions about what I'm capable of giving, and it puts me into a place of thinking I'm like irredeemably selfish. So that's the little toilet vortex that I go down in those moments, and I can recede. So that's one thing that happens. I have not a small amount of conflict sometimes at work, not necessarily with the small teams that I work with, like on my podcast. That's pretty seamless little place. But I can't go into great detail about this, but I've certainly had some conflicts at work that are very hard to deal with. And um, I can see in these conflicts triggering of my ancient insecurities around fear around money, or not wanting to be bullied or pushed around or taken advantage of. And so in some of my business dealings, there have been stressors that I've handled with varying degrees of skill.
I'm so glad to hear of all your struggles. I thought you were perfect. No, I mean, I always want, like, when I'm listening to your show or listen to anybody talk, I always want, like, give me some specifics, help me kind of relate to that. And I think what's one of the most interesting things about you is you're a well-known network anchor, being recognized in a lot of different places that you go, having tremendous success in a industry where very few people have it, and then you transition into all of the work that you're doing now. And I just wonder what role ego plays. When I lost my national live radio show, and I thought I was done for. Like, what did that,
Mm.
who am I? What did that mean? You chose to do with this completely different thing, which has been an amazing, must be so gratifying for you. But what role does ego play for you and to other men who, maybe lose, like they're like me, their job that was their identity or that they loved? Then what? And then you have marriage issues, and then your kid goes to college as mine just did, and like, who the hell am I? What am I supposed
Mm.
to be doing anymore?
Mm-hmm. Ego plays a big role, and I don't want us to vilify it. Ryan Holiday, who I admire actually, and I think I'm going to try to get him on my show. He's never been on, but I really do admire not only his work but also like what he's built. Um, he has a book called "Ego is the Enemy," and I know he's using that phrase poetically, but I think vilifying the fact that you have an ego it's a little bit like how indicting Trump just makes him stronger, or firing at the Hulk just makes the Hulk stronger. The ego thrives on conflict. So the actual, and you've heard me use this phrase before, the radical disarmament is high fiving. It's just like, oh, I've given my inner hustler a name, which is a little cheesy, but whatever. Um, it's this is there's precedent for this. There's a whole school of psychology called internal family systems, where you give the various parts of your personality a name and then try to develop a relationship with them. And it can feel very forced and cheesy, but I think it's actually quite successful. Can be quite effective. So I have this little inner character. I call him Sammy, because there was a great book written in the 30s or 40s called "What Makes Sammy Run," about a pathologically ambitious Hollywood executive. And so I remember reading that in college. And so I have that in me, this relentlessly acquisitive, always hustling, always looking for an opportunity. I have that in me. And instead, what I've learned, especially in recent years, is when I see that coming up in meditation or in my regular, free range living, I am getting better and better at smiling at it.
Hmm.
That pattern in my mind is not something to be excised like a cancer. It is something to be grateful for. And like, yes, there is this demon of mine, Sammy, who can be totally destructive, but it is just the organism trying to protect itself. It's some neurotic pattern that I developed when I was younger and probably inherited through my family. I often think about, I had a great grandfather, a Jew, got kicked out of Russia or escaped Russia in the early 1900s, came to this country and hustled and hustled and hustled, and then became a crook. And there are all these articles written about him. Um, he was a corrupt bail bondsman who like put his in-laws' house up as collateral for some con man to get out of jail. And then when that con man jumped bail, my great grandfather killed himself. And that's all, like, I found the articles. And so I think about him as like, yes, it's this, I have in me this fear-based striving, uh, which is just trying to keep me safe. And what's the better way to deal with Sammy when he comes up? Pretend he's not there, declare him the enemy, or deny, so is it denial or and vilification, or is it like, yo, thank you, I appreciate you, this is, first of all, you may have some smart ideas, and I appreciate that you're trying to protect this organism here. However, I don't need to listen to everything you're saying. I can take the good stuff and leave the bad, and it can help to have friends to figure out what's the good stuff Sammy's serving up and what's the bad, and run those ideas by your friends or by your wife or your shrink or whatever. And so I think ego is a normal and healthy part of the human condition. You just want to develop a healthy relationship to it.
And you want to be able to see it and name it. I like that. I like that a lot. I've heard you talk about that a little bit, and I love that Ryan Halliday. I look forward to your chat with him. I bought like 10 copies of that. Ego is the enemy, and I've given them out to a lot of friends and even listeners. What's the other one that he wrote? The small book, Silence is the Key. I think is also, I think, the name of it.
Illness is the Key or something like that. And
Stillness,
he wrote another book.
That's right.
Called Perennial Seller. He's a market, for people who haven't listened to him. He came up through the marketing world, and he's now very interested in stoicism. And so I don't know him personally, but I definitely follow his work, and have been meaning to have him on for a long time. And
when you,
so I don't mean to criticize him. I'm just saying, like, because I think he means that ego is the enemy in a healthy way. It's just that I don't want people to take it literally.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that I'm glad that you give some detail and split that hair. But when you're talking about the voice, it made me think of Ethan Kross and this book,
Yes.
Chatter, which,
Yes.
I bought a lot of the books from the authors, and I've used a lot of the techniques that I've learned, but I think maybe Chatter is one of the most important work. But my question to you is about what he teaches and what he writes in his research. But more importantly, Dan, I listen to your show all the time. I try to put it in my practice, but man, I forget a lot of what I heard. You talk about provisional language and reflective listening. Those have made huge impacts on my life, and then I don't do them sometimes or often. And how do I be more consistent with the modalities, the techniques that I've learned from you, from Ethan, from anyone?
This is such a good question. The way I try to think about, sorry, before I say something hopefully constructive, just to say, I sometimes worry about the amount of content I'm personally putting out into the world, in the podcast and news. I've started a newsletter now, and I do social media now. I just started with that a couple months ago. And I sometimes worry, am I flooding people with information?
No. The answer to that is no, because the answer to that is I'll take whatever I want.
Right, exactly. Well, so that's, I think, the answer to your question. You should take whatever you want, and then, because there's lots of information out there, some of it put out by me, some of it put out by you, many of other, Adam Grant, Ethan Kross, Sam Harris, whatever. you got to pick your spots. You can't boil the ocean. You can't do it all at once. You got to pick a few things that you're going to work on, and then give yourself a break. In other words, do your best to enact them or operationalize them in your life, but understanding that you, like everybody else who's ever been born, you are a fuck up. And evolution did not want you to, natural selection did not wire you for healthy habits. We are wired for looking for threats, like looking for a saber-toothed tiger, and also for looking for food and mates, because natural selection really just cared about getting your DNA into the next generation. So forgetting to do the shit you say you want to do is the number one problem. I mean, that actually I think is the enemy.
Yeah.
And so you have to take drastic measures to remember to do the things you believe you care about. I mean, I have a tattoo on my wrist that I just got a couple months ago. My wife and I went and got tattoos. Mine is an acronym, FTBOAB. It's a Buddhist expression for the benefit of all beings. It can sound a little like ethereal or whatever, but it really is basically a reminder for me to get my head out of my ass and to not let Sammy run the show, so that I can be, to the best of my ability, motivated not just by self-aggrandizement, but also by, and some of that's going to be there, by the way, but also by a desire to help other people, which, by the way, is helping myself because it feels good to help other people. And so back to your question, how do you remember to do all of this? I think you just need to pick a few practices and do your best to stick with them while having a sense of humor about it.
Always try to keep a sense of humor about it and everything. But I feel like for me, the answer to that question is my daily practice. So I tried everything in my life, my whole life. I don't know why. When I was a young man, I was a jock. I was in the sports and everything. But for whatever reason, I was a dreamer. I had a dream to be a successful stand-up comedian. And the only way to do that was to follow my dreams. And how do I get better as a person? Oh, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to be really focused. I'm going to read these books and listen to these tapes, and always looking for, I was a self-help like junkie for, I think, a long time, but I was evidence-based. And so a lot of that shit I just didn't believe, and it didn't work. And then I would start therapy, one-on-one therapy. Well, that's got to be the answer. But Dan, all the things that I learned and forgot and then learned again didn't matter until I started a daily practice where I every day started the day with reminding myself of so many of the things I've learned through your podcast, from you, from your experts. But I feel like I've got to remind myself every day. Basically, I say this. You may relate, you may not, but every morning I'm like, just don't be a dick to anybody at all today. Like, notice the moment between stimulus and response when I'm triggered and I'm offended. Someone like me, someone like you, a lawyer, you can have the quickest wit, the sharpest tongue, and it will destroy everything in your path. So try not to be a dick today is kind of where I might start my meditation. The daily reminders are what works for me.
Yes. I should have said this. You're absolutely right. If you want to remember to do the stuff that you say you care about, that we know from the evidence is going to improve your life, practices really help because we are wired for forgetting. So, I mean, what I like about meditation as a practice is that you can hear as many inspirational podcasts as you want. You can read as many books as you want, but in all likelihood, you will forget. What meditation does is kind of pound this into your neurons in a really, really helpful way. And so I highly recommend meditation, but you can turn anything into a practice, just the way you wake up in the morning and say, just don't be a dick today. For me, I wake up in the morning and when I can remember, and I'm getting better at remembering it, before I get out of bed, I make a little promise. And it sounds a little forced, but it's like, my goal today is to make awesome shit that helps people do their lives better and to work on the relationships in my life, including my relationship with myself. Boom. That's my little cheesy little mantra, or my cheesy little vow, my intention. And I set that in the morning. And then before I do anything else in the day, like right before I exercise, right before I meditate, right before I start writing my book. I try to remember to dedicate this work to the benefit of everybody, that I'm not just doing this for my own personal gratification, that it could help other people. But by the way, I don't rule myself out. For the benefit of all beings, that all word includes me. So I'm not saying I need to be, in a hair shirt and all self-sacrificing. It's we're all part of a system, and you don't need to leave yourself out. So anyway, just to get back to your point, having these little practices and habits and booting them up is the best way to insulate yourself against the fog of forgetting.
Right. Whatever those minds that you step on a regular basis with the same people often as well. You have the loving kindness meditation, which I forgot about. Again, forgot about it until I was prepping to talk to you. And you reminded me, and I've been doing it, and it's basically you go through and you think of different people, and you can do it, right? Do you want to list it off real quick?
Yeah, sure. This is an ancient practice, 2,600 years old. It's called loving kindness meditation. It's going to sound very, very cheesy to some people. To others, it won't. But to me, it certainly did. And there's a ton of scientific evidence to suggest that this practice has physiological, psychological, and behavioral benefits. So it can really make a difference. So the practice is you sit quietly, close your eyes, bring to mind an easy person, or it could be a pet, somebody that's very easy to love. And then you repeat 4 phrases. May you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. And then you move on to yourself, same phrases. Move on to a mentor, then a neutral person, somebody in your life you see all the time but often overlook, then a difficult person, probably not hard to conjure, and then all beings everywhere. And again, this can sound, I joke often that it's like Valentine's Day with a gun to your head. But if you were an alien and you landed on this planet and went to a gym and saw people systematically lifting and putting down heavy weights or running in place for 45 minutes, you would think that seems very forced and awkward. But that's what it takes to exercise the body, and the same is true for the brain and the mind. And so I recommend these practices.
I started doing it again, and I keep visualizing the same person as my neighbor. I really don't like this lady. I can't do it. Haven't been. I've done it 3 times, and every time it ends with violence. I'll get there.
It can help to pick somebody who's mildly annoying as opposed to like really triggering.
Okay, I'll go a little. I'll take
Work your way up. Yeah,
a notch. Yeah. You talk about science. I think one of the most appealing things from the very beginning of your work with 10% Happier was that you are a journalist, and you understand how journalism works. You understand how evidence-based science works, and that's how you editorially select your guests and the issues that you talk about, the tough questions that I think you ask some of those who don't necessarily have the science on their side. So my question is, there's about a lot of guys who are out there trying to be self-help gurus, self-betterment. A lot of them are bad, and they're doing bad things, and they're exploiting old practices, and they're just in it to make money. I know you know who some of them are, and you think about them. How do you know? How does the listener, how does the student know to find a teacher that isn't selling them snake oil or something that doesn't work, or doing it for them, really first and foremost for themselves? There's so many out there.
That's tricky, because if you're a bad actor and you're getting popular, it's because you're good at projecting helpfulness. I just think there are so many names out there already, big names, that are already popular, that you should just start with. Like we mentioned, Sam Harris, Adam Grant, Brene Brown is a incredibly positive player, Esther Perel, Gretchen Rubin.
My favorite teacher, the one that's most impressed me. Can you call someone a teacher if you've never met them or been their student?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
Pema Chodron, who I think.
Yeah, Pema Chodron. Yeah, I'm thinking mostly of people with podcasts.
You're right. No, you're right. Yeah.
But Pema Chodron's amazing. She's written a bunch of books. So like I can't think of many big name players who I'm like, oh well, no, that's bad news. Um,
Glad to hear that.
like Andy Puttycombe, the guy at Headspace, he's super legit. Yeah, and the Calm app has a bunch of teachers who I know on it. So I'm thinking of big name resources. Andrew Huberman, I don't know him, but he seems super legit. He seems great. And I've never had him on my show. Peter Attia, I do know. I think he's wonderful. So there aren't like, I don't see a ton of red flags. I think if you're going with a reputable source or and a big name, generally speaking, they seem to be pretty good right now.
Love it. I can't thank you enough for talking to me today. I really appreciate your kindness to me over the years, and most importantly, your work and what it's meant to me. What's next for you besides TikTok? You're on TikTok now. I love it.
So it was pointed out to me that I'm a moron for not having done social media for so long. Because that is where people are. And if you want to want to grow your business, that's like what you got to do.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I resisted it and resisted it in part because I know like I don't like the way my mind reacts to social media. Um, but anyway, I finally was prevailed upon to do it. And I started posting, short videos with like what I call like wisdom bombs on TikTok and Instagram and a few other spots. And I'm just it's an experiment. I'm kind of in experimental mode. I mean, I just started a newsletter. I've been experimenting with live events. I'm doing my first retreat at Omega, which is in Rhinebeck, New York, where people can come, and I'll be with two great meditation teachers. I'm doing some live podcasts. I'm just trying shit out, and some of it will work, some of it won't. I think for a long time I was a little bit, especially when I was at ABC News, I didn't have a lot of time to experiment with my brand, and now I'm really trying to do some of the stuff that I should have done a long time ago.
The one thing that I think is missing from the Dan Harris world is that you don't get to employ your razor sharp wit enough, because so many of
Mm,
the people that you're talking to are these amazing gurus and teachers, and it would throw them off. Or but like, going back and thinking about, you're watching you on live television, I'm guessing you missed that. I missed that to some extent, being in a studio with a bunch of people and bantering
yes.
off them. And I know you're doing this live event with these two meditation teachers who've been on your podcast a couple times. Really interesting conversations. But I'm looking forward to seeing you in that kind of like morning zoo. I know you're trying to create that where you can banter and bust chops. It's got to be with someone that you trust, because people get their feelings hurt. But
Yes.
I love that about you. It's certainly something that I love, a way I like to be. But it's hard when you're just one on one with a guru, I suppose, or an older person, or somebody who just doesn't get your wit. I think you're one of the funnier guys in all of, and you even had a sense of that on ABC. But I just want to see Dan Harris unleashed with a bunch of people who get the wit and humor that's so valuable to your personality. I know.
I really appreciate that. I think you're absolutely right. My wife's been making me this point for a long
Mm.
time that ironically, at ABC News on the morning show, I was in some ways more relaxed than I am sometimes on my podcast because I am, I feel this responsibility to, I swear and make jokes and stuff like that. But in a one-on-one conversation where you're really trying to draw people out and let them teach what they have to teach, it's not so much banter. And I really loved being a morning news anchor where the banter, not knowing what somebody was going to say and what was going to happen next, there's a kind of electricity to that. And so I've been trying to do podcast episodes, as you know, that we call meditation party, that are a little bit less
I
structured and
love it.
more banter oriented. And I'm gonna definitely keep going in that direction because
Yeah.
I think it's just so much fun.
Yeah, you got to be on set or in a studio with people that
Yes.
well, so they
Yes.
know they're not going to get hurt. It's like someone just
Yes.
walks into your studio, they can't. But I certainly miss that about live radio. I guess let me just ask you one more quick question. You talk a lot about your son, and I think it's like 8 now or 9 or
Yeah.
something.
8. Yeah.
How is your practice? How is what you've learned made you a better parent? I feel like, my daughter just went to college, and I am pretty confident. I'm very confident. It's the best role I played was as a
Mm.
parent, and it's definitely because I was present as much as I
Mhm.
could possibly be. Mindfulness is the practice that so helped me as a parent, just being in that moment. What has been that you've learned that you would share with listeners and friends, I'm sure, the best thing about that you've learned to be the best dad you can be?
Well, I think one paradoxical impact of meditation is that you are more self-aware, and I can see I can more readily see the areas where I need work. And so sometimes I can see a disproportionate reaction in my mind when my son does things that I don't like about myself. So he's got some anxiety, and when I see that come up, I can have a I don't actually do it, but I can feel a desire to say, suck it up. And because that's not like how I was raised by my dad, but definitely the culture raised me that way. And so in some ways I'm more in touch with um the difficult aspects of my mind as it relates to him. On the other hand, though, I think that meditation has helped me see it and not be owned by it, and to make a better decision. Not all the time, I still screw up, make parenting mistakes, but I thought, just to put a bow around this, I feel pretty confident that he really knows that I love him, which I've always felt about my dad. Like, he was very clear,
Yeah,
his affection for me.
mine too. Yeah.
But I'm frostier than my dad, and I had a bit of a victory, or a nice little moment, where I can't remember, it was maybe this past Father's Day, or maybe one before, when Alexander had to fill out a form at school, like, what are the like, what's your dad like, type of thing, with like fill in the blank. And one of the questions was, what does he say most often? And he wrote, I love you. And I thought, all right, yeah, I I this meditation stuff, where you can counter program against your most noxious impulses and work on the areas where you need the most work. And it's not just meditation, it's therapy, having friends, just all of these efforts that I've put in, that many other people put in too, to do life better. Like, they do work. It's not like a silver bullet. You're still going to fuck things up all the time, but
Well,
like,
we can,
you can get better.
yeah. I mean, like I started, I'll end the same way. Your work, your podcasts has made my life infinitely better. I've suffered so much less. I've found so many solutions in so many parts of my life as a result. And I am just so grateful for it being there. And I really get excited about what you do next. And I'm super grateful that you agreed to talk to me again, Dan. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep up the great work, man.
My pleasure. It was super fun. I really appreciate the kind words too. Thank you.